General Fritz Bayerlein looked up at 9:40 in the morning on July 25th, 1944. The birds had stopped singing. Then the vibrations started in the soles of his boots before he even heard the engines. The sky over Normandy was filling with aircraft. He had commanded Panzer Lehr Division for 5 months. He was one of Germany's most experienced Panzer officers. He had never seen anything like this. The first wave was fighter bombers, hundreds of them screaming down to strafe and bomb German positions along the Perrier to Saint-Lô road. Bayerlein's headquarters shook with the explosions. Then came the heavy bombers, B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, not dozens, not hundreds, 1,500 of them. They stretched from horizon to horizon. They blotted out the sun, and they were heading directly toward Panzer Lehr's positions. Panzer Lehr wasn't an ordinary division. The name meant teaching. This was Germany's demonstration unit. Every piece of equipment was the newest and best. Every soldier was a veteran instructor. When the division formed in January 1944, it received brand new Panthers and Panzer IVs straight from the factories. Its Panzer Grenadiers rode in half-tracks instead of trucks. It was one of the few Wehrmacht divisions fully equipped with armored transport for its infantry. Fritz Bayerlein was chosen to command this elite force. He had earned a reputation as one of Germany's finest Panzer officers. He had served as a key staff officer under Guderian during the lightning invasions of Poland and France, and as chief of staff to Rommel during the Afrika Korps' legendary victories. On the Eastern Front, he commanded the 3rd Panzer Division and led a breakout from Soviet encirclement at Kirovohrad. But 7 weeks of fighting in Normandy had ground Panzer Lehr down. The hedgerow country was a nightmare for tanks. Allied fighter bombers hunted any vehicle that moved in daylight. By July 25th, Bayerlein had approximately 2,200 effective combat troops in the forward positions, 12 Panzer IVs operational, 16 Panthers fit for action, 30 more tanks sat in repair shops behind the lines. Germany's elite teaching division was about to learn a lesson no one would forget. 7 weeks after D-Day, the Allied invasion was in trouble. 1 million men had landed in France, but they were trapped in a narrow beachhead barely 50 miles wide. The problem was the bocage. Normandy's hedgerows weren't garden borders. They were ancient earthen walls up to 10 feet tall, topped with dense vegetation 3 feet thick. They had grown for centuries. They created natural fortresses every 100 yards. For the GIs, every hedgerow was a blind corner where death waited. The men weren't just tired. They were haunted by the feeling that they were fighting ghosts in a green maze. American infantry advanced at a crawl, 1 hedgerow at a time, each one defended by German machine guns and mortars. Each advance measured in bodies. Between La Haye-du-Puy and Lessay, American forces lost 1,000 men per kilometer. The single hill of Montcastre cost 5,000 casualties. Commanders started comparing it to the Western Front in 1917. General Omar Bradley commanded the American First Army. He watched his men die in the hedgerows and saw no end to it. The British were stuck outside Caen. Operation Goodwood had just failed with massive tank losses. If the Allies couldn't break out of Normandy, the invasion might stall permanently. Bradley needed something that would shatter German defenses completely. He had one idea. It was unprecedented. It was incredibly dangerous, and it might kill as many Americans as Germans. Bradley flew to England personally to make his request. He wanted the 8th Air Force's heavy bombers, the B-17s and B-24s, that usually attacked German factories and cities. He wanted them to bomb his own front line. The air commanders were skeptical. Strategic bombers weren't designed for this. They dropped ordnance from 20,000 feet onto area targets. The margin of error was measured in hundreds of yards. Using them near friendly troops was asking for disaster. Bradley insisted. He designated a target zone 5 kilometers long by 2 kilometers deep, directly in front of 7th Corps. He wanted every bomb to fall in that rectangle. He demanded the bombers approach parallel to the front line. If they released early, bombs would fall on open ground, not American positions. The Air Force agreed to the operation, but refused the approach angle. Coming in parallel would take too long. Too many aircraft in the air at once. They would fly perpendicular to the front, straight toward American lines. Bradley accepted the risk. He ordered his infantry to pull back 1,200 meters before the bombing. It wasn't much of a safety margin. The attack was scheduled for July 24th. Then everything went wrong. July 24th dawned with heavy cloud cover. The bombers were already airborne when Bradley's headquarters ordered the attack canceled. Bad weather made accurate bombing impossible. Some aircraft received the recall, others didn't. 300 bombers continued toward Normandy. They couldn't see their targets through the clouds. They dropped their bombs anyway. Many fell short. 25 American soldiers died. 131 were wounded, all of them killed by their own Air Force. The Germans in the target zone heard the explosions. They saw American troops withdraw 1,200 meters. They understood immediately what was coming. Bayerlein ordered his men to dig deeper. They spent the night in desperate silence, clawing into the earth like animals trying to bury themselves away from the sky. He requested reinforcements. He knew the Americans would try again as soon as the weather cleared. Bradley faced an agonizing decision. The July 24th bombing had alerted the Germans. Surprise was lost. But 7th Corps was positioned for the breakthrough. The bombers were ready. The weather forecast for July 25th was clear. He ordered the attack to proceed. Same target zone, same approach angle, same risk to American troops. This time, there would be no recall. At the appointed hour, 600 fighter bombers began their attack runs. They hit German artillery positions, strong points, and troop concentrations along a narrow strip west of Saint-Lô. Then the heavy bombers arrived. Bayerlein watched from his command post as wave after wave of 4-engine bombers released their payloads. The explosions merged into a continuous roar. The ground shook without pause. He later described what he saw. The bombers came as if on a conveyor belt, he said. Back and forth the carpets were laid. Artillery positions were wiped out. Tanks overturned and buried. Infantry positions flattened. All roads and tracks destroyed. Over 1,500 heavy bombers and nearly 400 medium aircraft dropped more than 4,000 tons of explosives on an area 12 square kilometers. That worked out to 5,000 bombs per square kilometer. 60,000 incendiary bombs added to the destruction. The bombardment lasted 45 minutes. The sun disappeared behind a wall of pulverized earth and cordite. For those minutes, it was midnight in the middle of the morning. By midday, Bayerlein said, the entire area resembled a moonscape. Bomb craters touched rim to rim. All signal communications had been cut. No command was possible. The shock effect on the troops was indescribable. Bayerlein's account of the next hour would haunt military historians. Several of my men went mad, he wrote. They rushed round in the open until they were cut down by splinters. Panzer Lehr's positions had become a killing ground. Tanks were flipped upside down by near misses. Artillery pieces disappeared under tons of earth. Bunkers that had survived weeks of fighting collapsed in seconds. The men who weren't killed outright were buried, burned, or concussed into catatonia. These weren't green recruits. These were veterans who had survived the frozen hell of the Eastern Front. To see them reduced to sitting motionless in craters, eyes wide and unseeing, That was the true measure of what the bombing had done. Bayerlein tried to reach his forward units by radio. Nothing by telephone. Lines cut everywhere. He sent motorcycle messengers. They didn't return. When he finally pieced together the situation, the numbers were staggering. Over 70% of the forward combat troops, Bayerlein reported, were either dead, wounded, crazed, or dazed. 45 minutes of bombing had destroyed more of Panzerlehr than 7 weeks of hedgerow fighting, and American infantry was already moving forward, advancing crater to crater toward what remained of German positions. The bombers killed Germans by the hundreds. They also killed Americans. Despite the 1,200-meter withdrawal, bombs fell short again. Dust and smoke obscured aim points. Aircraft released late or early. 111 American soldiers died. 490 were wounded. Among the dead was Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair. He was the commander of Army Ground Forces, responsible for training and organizing every American soldier in the war. He was the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theater. McNair wasn't supposed to be at the front. He was in France as part of Operation Quicksilver, the deception plan that created a fake army group to fool German intelligence. He had come forward to observe the attack with the 30th Infantry Division. A bomb landed near his foxhole. The explosion hurled his body dozens of feet. He was identified only by the 3 stars on his collar and his West Point ring. His death was kept secret for weeks. The deception had to continue. The man who helped build the American army was lowered into the ground in a service so quiet it felt like a secret, attended only by 6 generals who knew they had killed one of their own. Eisenhower watched the bombing from a forward position. He returned to England that evening, dejected. He vowed never to use heavy bombers in support of ground troops again, but the bombing had worked. On July 27th, an emissary from Field Marshal von Kluge arrived at Bayerlein's command post. He brought direct orders from the commander of German forces in the West. "Hold your positions," the officer told Bayerlein. "Not a single man is to leave his post." Bayerlein exploded. But it wasn't just rage. It was grief. His response became one of the most quoted statements of the Normandy campaign. "Out in front, everyone is holding out," Bayerlein told the emissary. "Everyone. My grenadiers and my engineers and my tank crews, they're all holding their ground. Not a single man is leaving his post. Not one." He paused. "They're lying in their foxholes, mute and silent. For they are dead. Dead. You may report to the Field Marshal that the Panzerlehr Division is annihilated. Only the dead can now hold the line." That evening, Bayerlein sent a written report that pulled no punches. After 49 days of fierce combat, Panzerlehr has ceased to exist as a fighting force. The enemy is now rolling through all sectors. American armor was pouring through gaps in the German line. There was nothing left to stop them. Armored spearheads raced forward at speeds approaching the tactical limits of their machines. Tanks tore down Norman lanes that had been death traps a week earlier. German resistance had simply ceased to exist. By July 28th, American forces broke into open country beyond the bocage. Tank country. The terrain Montgomery had promised to capture in the first week. By July 31st, the German defensive position in Normandy had collapsed completely. Avranches fell. The gateway to Brittany was open. On August 1st, Patton's Third Army became operational. 7 divisions poured through the breakthrough in 3 days. The race across France had begun. What had taken 7 weeks to stalemate took 45 minutes of bombardment to break. The infantry still had to fight through shell-shock survivors on the 25th and 26th, but the defensive crust was shattered. Field Marshal von Kluge still believed the main Allied attack would come at Caen. Hitler ordered a counterattack toward Avranches with 8 Panzer divisions. Only 4 could be assembled, and all were exhausted and under strength. The counterattack failed. Within weeks, German forces were trapped in the Falaise pocket. The Wehrmacht in France was destroyed. 45 minutes of carpet bombing had accomplished what 50 days of hedgerow fighting could not. Bayerlein survived. He rebuilt Panzerlehr from survivors and replacements. It was a cycle of annihilation. Destroyed in the Bulge trying to capture Bastogne, rebuilt in the winter, and finally shattered for good in the Ruhr pocket in April 1945, Bayerlein surrendered to Americans on his own authority, saving what remained of his men. He spent 2 years as a prisoner, then wrote military histories for the U.S. Army. He died in 1970. Germany's elite teaching division taught one final lesson at Saint-Lô. No amount of training, no quality of equipment, no human courage could survive what American industrial power could deliver from the sky. The Wehrmacht never recovered from the day the sky fell.